Some motorcycles are built to be ridden hard and push limits, but not every motorcycle gets the green light to hit public streets. Whether it's due to emissions, safety concerns, or simply being too extreme for everyday roads, you'll never get to see these bikes talk more about experiencing what it feels like to ride them, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Here are 7 banned motorcycles you'll never see on the road. 7. Harley-Davidson XR-750. Harley-Davidson isn't exactly known for building outlaw motorcycles, but the XR-750 is an exception. This isn't your typical cruiser or weekend touring bike. This is a machine built to dominate the dirt. Released in 1970, this motorcycle was built to replace the outgoing KR-750, which had become outdated in the face of new competition. Harley's engineers stripped the old bike down, lightened the frame, and gave it a high-performance V-twin engine designed for speed and agility. The result was a motorcycle that went on to become the most successful race bike in AMA history. And here's the kicker, it was so good, it never needed to be replaced. The XR-750 dominated flat-track racing for decades, racking up wins and solidifying its legacy. But here's the reason you won't be cruising around town on one. The XR-750 was never built for the streets. No lights, no turn signals, and none of the legal essentials you'd need to register it. It was a purebred racer built to win races, and it did that better than almost any bike in history. But while the XR-750 was banned because it was never built for the streets, the next bike? It is simply too powerful to handle. See why. 6. Ducati 1299 Panigale R Final Edition. Ducati has built a reputation for making some of the finest performance machines in the world, and the 1299 Panigale R Final Edition is one of the most extremes they've ever made. Underneath the bike's beautiful Italian bodywork sits a 1285cc Super Quattro V-twin, pumping out 209 horsepower. That's superbike level power packed into a frame that's engineered for precision and aggression. It is also the last of its kind, as Ducati retired the V-twin superbike layout after this, making way for the Panigale V4. But before you start imagining yourself ripping through city streets on one, here's something you need to know. The Final Edition was not built for public roads. Ducati designed this bike with track performance in mind, and while some versions were road legal in Europe, stricter regulations in other regions, including the US, made it a rare and often restricted sight. Beyond that, the Final Edition was produced in very limited numbers, and most of them ended up in the hands of collectors rather than riders. But while the Ducati was held back by exclusivity and regulations, this next motorcycle had a different problem. It was simply too much for certain markets to handle. Stay with us to see why. 5. Yamaha RD500LC. Back in the 1980s, Yamaha was crushing the Grand Prix racing scene with its two-stroke machines. And if you wanted a taste of that performance on the street, the RD500LC was as close as you could get. Inspired by the YZR500, the RD500LC was a road-going replica of a GP race bike. It packed a 499cc V4 two-stroke engine, producing around 88 horsepower in a lightweight chassis. That might not sound crazy by today's standards, but in the 1980s, this was an absolute rocket. However, the problem was that the RD500LC was never officially sold in the United States. Why? Emissions regulations. Two-stroke engines are notorious for being dirty, and by the time the RD500LC was ready for production, US lawmakers were already cracking down on high-emission motorcycles. So while riders in Europe, Canada, and Australia got to experience the thrill of this GP-inspired monster, American riders were left out. Of course, some enthusiasts managed to import and register them under loopholes, but legally? The RD500LC was banned from American roads before it even got a chance to make its mark. While the RD500LC was banned because of emission regulations, the next bike? It was only made to be owned by collectors. See why. If you're enjoying the video, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more amazing videos on your favorite motorcycles. 4. MV Agusta F4 1000 Serie Oro. If there's one brand that defines Italian motorcycle artistry, it's MV Agusta. And when they built the F4 1000 Serie Oro, they didn't just make a superbike, they built a masterpiece. Designed by the legendary Massimo Tamburini, the same genius behind the Ducati 916, the F4 1000 Serie Oro was meant to be an exclusive performance machine. Only 300 units were ever made, each one made from carbon fiber and titanium. And underneath all that exotic bodywork, a 998cc inline-4 engine producing 166 horsepower, a monstrous figure for the early 2000s. But here's the catch. The F4 1000 Serie Oro was never intended to be a street bike. MV Agusta built it as a collector's piece, a bike that would sit in private collections and museums rather than city streets. It lacked the regulatory approvals for street use. And since so few were made, MV never bothered to go through the expensive process of making it compliant. But while the F4 1000 Serie Oro was banned because it was for the racetrack, this next bike? It was simply too powerful to be handled. See why. 3. Honda NR750. Most motorcycles play by the rules. They follow conventional designs using round pistons, standard engine layouts, and predictable performance numbers. The Honda NR750 didn't do any of that. This was Honda's moonshot, a motorcycle so ahead of its time that even today, it feels like something from the future. What made this bike so different? Well, oval pistons. Yes, oval. Turning its 750cc V4 engine into a quasi V8. The result was a motorcycle capable of over 14,000 RPM, producing 125 horsepower with an exhaust note unlike anything else on the road. But here's where things get complicated. The NR750 was never meant to be a mass-market bike. Honda built it as a technological showcase, proving it could push the limits of engineering. Some markets allowed limited road registrations, but in many places, especially the US, the NR750 never met the necessary emissions and safety standards. But while the NR750 was banned because it was too powerful, this next bike? It was banned because people were too scared to ride it. See why. 2. Kawasaki Ninja H2R. You've probably heard of the Kawasaki Ninja H2, one of the fastest road-legal motorcycles on the planet. But its big brother, the H2R? That's a whole different animal. Kawasaki didn't build the H2R for casual riders. They didn't even build it for expert riders. They built it to show the world what happens when you remove all limitations and create the most powerful motorcycle possible. The motorcycle features a 998cc supercharged inline-4 pushing out a ridiculous 310 horsepower or 326 horsepower with ram air. That's Formula One level power in a package that weighs less than a sport bike. And that's exactly why it's illegal for road use. Kawasaki never intended the H2R to be a street bike. It has no mirrors, no headlights, and an exhaust so loud it can be heard from miles away. In fact, the bike is so aggressive that even experienced riders have described it as terrifying to ride at full throttle. So why did Kawasaki even make it? Simple, to break records. The H2R was built for closed course racing, setting top speed benchmarks and proving just how far modern engineering can go. While the H2R was banned because it never got the necessary regulations, this next bike? It had to be banned because the government thought it was too dangerous. See why. 1. Suzuki RG500 Gamma. Unlike most other motorcycles on this list that never got street permission, the Suzuki RG500 Gamma got the necessary regulations before governments decided that they should have never allowed the bike in the first place. Suzuki was at the forefront of racing in the 1980s, dominating Grand Prix circuits with their RG500 race bike. But what if you could ride something just like it on the street? That's exactly what Suzuki set out to do with the RG500 Gamma. However, they forgot to hold back. This wasn't some watered-down imitation of a race bike. The RG500 Gamma was as close as you could get to a full-fledged GP machine without an AMA license. It had a 4-square 498cc two-stroke engine, producing 95 horsepower in a frame that weighed just 340 pounds. That power-to-weight ratio was insane for the time. This bike didn't just accelerate, it exploded forward. But with great power comes, well, chaos. The RG500 Gamma wasn't just fast, it was brutal. Two-stroke power bands are notoriously unpredictable, and this one hit like a sledgehammer. 1 second you're cruising at 5,000 RPM. The next, the power kicks in like an afterburner, and if you're not ready for it, you're either looping the bike or sliding into the nearest guardrail. And then there were the emissions. By the mid-80s, environmental regulations were tightening, especially in the US. Two-strokes weren't just powerful, they were dirty, pumping out unburnt fuel and excessive smoke with every twist of the throttle. As such, the RG500 Gamma was never officially imported to the United States. A few riders managed to bring them in through loopholes, but as emission standards got stricter, registering an RG500 Gamma became nearly impossible. Which of these bikes would you want to ride? Let us know in the comments. Also, hit that subscribe button for more amazing videos about your favorite bikes.